First of all, I'm so glad you've all joined us today and taken time out of your very busy days to sit and join this conversation, because as I told Maura before I let everybody in, I cannot imagine a more important conversation to be having now other than the intersection of ambition and success and anxiety, and what drives you and what undermines you, and how do you tap into your anxiety to fuel your drive ahead. So I am thrilled to have Maura Ahrens-Mealy here. She is the author of The Anxious Achiever. She's also, I happen to have her other book here, should anybody want to look that up. I have hiding in the bathroom here, which is really one of the best covers ever of a book. And when this book came out, I had a copy and everybody wanted my copy, and I gave it away. I was like, okay, you can have my copy. And so now I'm thrilled that we have a copy here at the List HQ. Should you be lucky enough to join us at the List HQ, you can borrow this copy. But here today, we are here to talk about The Anxious Achiever, turn your biggest fears into your leadership superpower. Now, you will probably recognize that the title of this book comes from Maura's amazing podcast, The Anxious Achiever, which is one of the top business podcasts in the world. Should we put a link in here? Should somebody put a link in here so we can also subscribe to Maura's podcast? Let's make sure we give her all the support on every single level today. All right. So first of all, how are you doing today, Maura? How's it going? Book launch is going. You traveled for a keynote. You didn't get stuck because of the tornadoes. Just like, let's have a check-in.
Yeah, I have to tell this story because I feel like I know so many of you and you will appreciate this because it's about boundaries and your family. So my book comes out Tuesday, super busy, right? And my mother, who has dementia and lives in Florida, and then my sister, who lives in London and has 2 small children, and her husband, all came to my house yesterday for the week. And I said to them, I see you laughing, Molly. I said to them a couple months ago, like, it's not a great time for me. It's like, I'm not there, I'm busy. They're like, no, it's fine. And so I get home from Iowa at midnight, and all these people are in my house, in my office, and all have lots of needs. And I keep saying to them, like, please don't ask me to do things. I'm not cooking. I'm not cleaning. I'm not here. And they're like, yeah. Okay. But can you just, and so finally I'm at Work Bar. And then I was like, I'm just going to rent a hotel room because I'm going to lose my mind with these people. And so I don't know if anyone else feels like, as much as they try to set boundaries with their family, they don't listen. And I know they're doing it from a place of love, and everyone's excited to be here, and it's Easter and Passover and everything, but like.
So you've set a boundary, you're at Work Bar, you have quiet.
Ish, yes.
Yeah. All right. So I want to start this conversation because I want you to explain what brought you to this book, but I want to set you up. So what I found so interesting when I was reading your intro was how you talked about the arc of your career and all of the amazing things that you've done with no kind of false modesty, no, like, I can't believe, no, like, someone like me could never have done this. Like, you just stepped into your power and owned it in that chapter where you talk about presidential politics, corporate America, tech startups, pioneering digital entrepreneur, one of the top business podcasts in the world. And I loved the refreshing way that you owned your achievements. And you also, with the same kind of like level setting, own your anxiety. And so tell us, in this arc of your story, how you learned success and anxiety can come together.
Well, the funny story about that part of the book is that at Harvard Business Review, your book gets peer reviewed. which is a very painful process. I do not recommend it. And the book went through peer review, and some of the feedback was, she sounds like a mess. I'm not sure I trust her.
Okay.
No, seriously, and I, first of all, I had a breakdown. I was like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. But then I realized, and my editor said to me, like, I don't actually think we work hard enough telling people why you have the right to write this book. Why should people listen to you? And so the part in the beginning where I lay out my awesome sauce is really a reaction to that peer review, but I do think it's important. And I know listeners, I can talk about this with you all. It's important twofold. The first is that I was raised to be an achiever. I am not from a world where it's like, oh, little old me ended up here. I was raised in a super competitive, super privileged New York City suburbs. You're doing this. In fact, for most of my career, I felt the worst guilt because I wasn't a lawyer, and my father had wanted me to be a lawyer so much. I felt like a failure. So that's my baggage. I will never feel like I've achieved enough. And then the second piece is that you can. You can have mental illness and achieve a ton. And in fact, a lot of people have. We just don't know it. And
Yeah.
right. And so I think that that's really important. I mean, I think that work is changing so fundamentally, and conversations around work are changing so fundamentally. And one of the upsides I see happening is that people are feeling the right, privileged people who have privileged jobs, to say, this is what I need. And when you have mental illness, you have to know what you need.
What I think is so interesting about that feedback you got from Harvard Business Review peer review is that we're so unused to hearing about the mess. But I actually think everybody has a mess. Like we all spend a lot of time making the office neat, getting the hair right, working with coaches so that you can walk into a room and own it. But all of that is because we're trying to hide the mess that's inside, inevitably, for everybody. So all those folks who say, I don't know if I trust her, they all need to get in touch with their mess a little bit. I liked the way you talked about your anxiety. I noticed in two ways. You talk about it like it's separate from you, that it doesn't necessarily define you, right? And so talk about that. Like, why is that important? Not to be the mess, but to recognize that it's sort of a part of the recipe.
Yeah, that's really essential. And I think anyone who's been in therapy, and if we have psychologists on today, will acknowledge, right, that part of what you do is you learn to build a little bit of a distance, and you learn to notice your anxiety. And it's really powerful. And you see this reflected in the language that we use today. People are not schizophrenic anymore. They may have schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. I am not bipolar. I have bipolar. And so I think that that's a nod to the recognition that we are multitudes, as Walt Whitman said. And there are pieces of us that are essential to us, but they don't necessarily need to control us. And so I actually was being interviewed the other day, and the producer hops on and he goes, I call my anxiety Frank. I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah. I don't mind to sit down. I'm like, I see you. You sit over there. Pipe down. I see you. I hear you. I know you're there. Just shh. I was trying to teach my 8-year-old daughter to do that too, right? To like see it. You can just tell her to shush. But you also write about in the I've written, I was showing Maura that I've like flagged pages, I've written notes, and I circled even as far as I got on the TOC, that table of contents, sorry, a little internal TOC, but that and you write about it as if it is like an employee, getting to know your anxiety or managing your anxiety at work. And so is that part of it too, that you are, you're managing, you're giving performance reviews, you're thinking about this is someone who works for you and you want them to, do a good job for you, to help you.
Yeah, I mean, you have a relationship with your anxiety, and sometimes it's a really dysfunctional relationship, and sometimes it's a harmonious relationship, and like any relationship, it ebbs and flows. I mean, to me, if there was one big aha moment I want people to take at a macro level from the book, it's this. We show up at work and we act out our shit on each other. And we act out our anxiety. It takes the form of micromanaging, it takes the form of control, it takes the form of shaming, it takes the form of mansplaining. It shows up. And that's because we react mindlessly when we're triggered, because our body builds habits, neural pathways. And if we can just learn to take a beat when anxiety strikes, interrogate it, or tell it to go sit down, or say, let's do this, we don't react mindlessly in ways that may not be serving us: overwork, emotional exhaustion, burnout, perfectionism, or the people who we work with. And that if we could all just take a beat and get in touch, it would be a huge gift to workers everywhere and ourselves.
I loved, there were a couple interviews with listers that I happened to notice. I love to see listers in books. The two right off the bat that really stuck with me were Christina Wallace, who's a Harvard professor, Harvard Business School professor, and Alyssa Mastromonaco, former deputy chief of staff at the White House, Obama's White House. And as we celebrated her new producer of Pretty Baby, which was a huge Sundance hit. But what I thought was so interesting about those two interviews in particular was how they talked about recognizing those triggers, because I think that that's really hard to do. And then not only making it their problem to solve, but making the workplace around them work for them. Particularly, Christina talks about how she gets very triggered by this performance review, right? About the feedback, and that she wants advance notice. So I'm interested, are there other kind of nuts and bolts tricks that you've used or that you've heard people use to even recognize those triggers in themselves? Because I don't think we do. We think it's our problem, right? We think that it's something we have to fix.
Right, or we don't even notice it, and we go into old behaviors like perfectionism, right? Like imposter syndrome feelings, like if I just stay here late enough and fix this all, things are going to be fine. I have honestly come to realize most of my workplace triggers through therapy. And that's why I think therapy is such a valuable career tool. We don't often think of it as that, but it's a hugely valuable career tool. And we all get triggered all the time. I have a great story in my book. Dr. Mark Brackett from Yale, he wrote Permission to Feel, huge leader on emotional regulation and all that stuff. He says he gets triggered all the time by his graduate students. And one night they were all working late, working on a presentation or something at his center. And one of the grad students said, let's order pizza. And they were like, 30 people there. And Mark was like, well, I don't know if we can expense it. Give me a sec. And she's like, no, I got it. I put it on my credit card. And Mark, who grew up with no money in an environment where money was very scarce, said, I was so triggered by this grad student's attitude and her seeming carelessness as I saw it. I was so triggered. And I think that's so powerful, right? Because our triggers are very complex. Sometimes they come from our childhood, they come from past experience, they come from who we are, or what we want, or what we worry about. And the process of learning to understand your triggers is really enlightening. And one of the best ways to start, therapy is great, is also to really pay attention and listen to your body, because your body is wise and your body's going to tell you you're triggered, or
Right.
that you're reacting because you're triggered. And so, my friend Rebecca Harley just calls it playing detective. But it's really, really tuning in to why that person's name. I had an interview with a CEO and he goes, oh my God, I have to tell you, Maura, I thought you were the other Maura and I almost canceled this meeting. And I was like, who's the other Maura? He's like, I don't like the other Maura. I don't want to talk to her. And when I saw your name in my schedule, I thought you were the other Maura and I was going to cancel. It's like, whoa, did that name trigger you? So yeah, it's sort of a process that we have to learn.
To ask yourself, why am I responding this way? I think is really interesting. But it's also, I mean, I think most of the folks on this call are senior leaders and probably have folks who report to them, but we also often all report to other people. And so sometimes I find when someone else has an outsized reaction to me, your first instinct is to say, like, what did I do? You're like, wait, like, why am I, or why is that situation causing that for them? I think is really important to ask yourself also. It takes some of the, I mean, I'm sure it takes a lot of practice, but to zoom out and have this perspective helps also to focus on the business, right? Like, what are we here to achieve? How can I take my BS out of it or take their BS out of it so that we can get to the goal in the end?
Totally. And I don't know how many of you have ever read Ron Heifetz. He's a famous leadership professor at Harvard, but that's his basic theory, is like, how do we sort of remove all of our personal dynamics and shit so we can focus on the work? It's really hard to do. And one more thing I want to say is that and this is why the work of people like Minda Harts has been so valuable to me, is that when you are different, when you are a person of, as another lister, Marianne Cooper, who I just interviewed, when you're a person of lower status in the organization, you may trigger people just by the way you look.
Right.
And that's not your fault, but it's happening. And of course, it makes us anxious. Of course, it has an impact. And unfortunately, that's a lot of the baggage that people at work deal with.
You mentioned something earlier. You mentioned actually a couple of things that I'm going to bring back, but one of the things you mentioned was shame. And I remember last time you and I were in conversation, it was early in the pandemic and people were out of work, and and we talked about shame in that context, that people didn't want to admit that they needed help, right? That they needed jobs. It was like really early pandemic and we were all terrified. And you brought up this idea of shame, that it feels shameful to ask for help. And I see that come up a lot. We just did this research around loneliness, and it was actually interesting. A lot of the senior level women didn't want to use the word lonely. They said, yes, I feel disconnected. Yes, I feel isolated. Yes, I feel I don't feel respected, or I feel unable to be myself. All of those things are lonely, but they didn't want to claim the word lonely because it felt like personal failure. Will you talk a little more about shame? I'm very interested in how that plays in your work. You're giving me a good smile.
I know. It's so funny. And I think that there are I was thinking about other words we use that don't feel as incriminating or self-blaming. I think in my work, people use the word burnout a lot when they really mean they're depressed or anxious. So I just think that's interesting. And your research is so great. I really recommend everyone check it out. I mean, at some level, shame is part of the human condition, I think. And us anxious achievers are very attuned to shame because we're very attuned to getting approval and to social comparison and what other people think. A lot of us, this is what Karen, an anecdote she told me to open with, but it's so silly and yet so profound. You know, we grew up getting that gold star. And we, in our minds, are still chasing the gold star. And there's always another gold star to get. And if we don't get the gold star, we internalize that. And so I think a lot of the shame, especially when it comes to achievement, is based on a belief we have that somehow our self-worth is tied to that. This lister, Julie Lythcott-Haims, has done a lot of work on this. And she and I think, have 3 episodes on my podcast because I love to talk to her about achievement and shame. And so the work, and I have not quite been able to do this, but I'm working on it, is to be able to separate the emotional investment from the achievement, because then the fear of shame is really lessened because you're allowed to screw up just like everyone else. It's not a personal indictment.
Say that again. The emotional investment. So the more emotionally invested you are in the achievement, it feels shameful if you can't achieve that thing. Is that the point? Yeah. And if you can separate yourself, if I achieve this, it doesn't make me better, stronger, smarter, more worthy than if I don't. And if I don't, it's data, right? You said that, I think you said that in here. I think I circled that one too, right? That anxiety is data.
Anxiety is data. And one of my favorite parts of the book is we talk about this, and I pose the question, who told you you always had to be so special? Which again is something that I think a lot of us gold star chasers feel inherently, that we have to be special, we have to be high achieving, otherwise we are shameful. We're lazy. Lazy is a word that pops up a lot in my interviews. People's inner critics, their inner voices. I am lazy. That's a shame word.
So how
And
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. I just want to know how you keep moving ahead if we're not chasing gold stars. Like, tell me, how do we think about, this isn't just like the anxious worker. This is the anxious achiever, right? Something has to drive you to keep looking for more,
Yeah. And I think ultimately you can come to a place of, I like achieving. This is who I am.
Right.
I can be amazing. I am amazing. I want to do this. The magic is to take some of the pressure and the internalized value out of it. You, again, in the book on the chapter on perfectionism, Thomas Greenspun says, if you lost the anxiety of perfectionism, you would still be excellent. You'd still be that excellent self who does excellent work. But the accompanying pressure would be less. And I think that is the goal. I'm not saying stop caring. And I think if you're an anxious achiever, part of you are just, that's who you are. You just vibrate at a 12. Like, it's just like, you're never done. But ideally you get to a place where you're like, you know what? I'm being an anxious achiever right now. Like, I really could stop and this would still be good.
How is it different for men than women? I'm listening to you about this perfectionism and the anxiety and the people vibrating at a 12. And I think I can see both of those people, men I know and women I know, who are like that, who are that. I mean, you sort of recognize them the minute that you're in conversation with them. It's like, okay, this is serious. But I think it's different. Is it different for men and women?
I think it's different because women are allowed to feel feelings and men aren't. And so a lot of men place their anxiety elsewhere and they get angry. They might act it out on other people versus themselves. I mean, I think the way it presents is different, but my audience is 50-50, and I try to over index on men, frankly, in my podcast, because I think the more men talk about this, the better we all are. I think the anxious need to achieve is not a female thing. I think sometimes we think perfectionism and all this stuff is, it's really not.
Let's talk more about perfectionism. The pressure to be perfect is something, is a really toxic pressure. And you talk in your book about this idea that you're setting the goals for yourself. They're not external goals. This isn't like someone else has set the deadline or like tells you that you have to stay up all night finishing this report or making it perfect or like making what the fonts and the mark, whatever it is, however the perfectionism manifests. But that every time you get closer to the goalpost, you move the goal. Mm-hmm. Right? We do it to ourselves. We move the goal. Well, that's not enough. It needs to be like this too. And maybe it's not at work. Actually, I find that a lot of women do this for themselves. The sort of in all sorts of areas of your
body image,
body, family, parenting. Yes. Okay. How do we release ourselves from perfectionism? How do we give ourselves some grace?
I think that the first step is to acknowledge that you're doing it and to ask yourself, who set this goal? Is it me?
Right.
And is this a good goal for me? Is it realistic? Stress. Here's this. I just want to take a quick. So stress would be your boss saying, I need this done by tomorrow. You're pulling an all-nighter. They're externally placing stress on you. Anxiety, manifesting as perfectionism, is this has to be perfect. I'm staying all day. Your boss isn't telling you that. Your boss may reward you. And so it's to look at that. And then it's really, I think, to learn two things. One is to practice putting less emotion into your outcomes. That's so valuable. It's so valuable for life. It's so valuable in parenting. When you set pressures for your kids that you realize are about you and you're so invested. And so there's a practice you can do where you literally practice reducing your emotional investment so that you as a person are not reflected in the outcome. And then the other thing is to really practice setting limits for yourself so that when you veer into overdrive or overly high expectations, you have some limit around a behavior so you can't burn out. Or if you're perfectionistic and you avoid, right? A lot of perfectionists, when they feel like the stakes are too high, they may be like, well, it's not worth doing. It's too much. I can't do it. To, again, try to lower the temperature, define what good is, try to define objectively what good is if you can't do it for yourself. And then set a limit. Maybe it's, I'm going to work 30 minutes on this, good or bad, and see where I'm at, you know?
I find that a lot of perfectionism in my own life comes from an imaginary future. If I don't get this right, I won't get this thing. And if I don't get this thing, I will never succeed at anything ever again, right? I think that like the snowballing effect that you put so much pressure on this particular moment is you lock yourself into a particular path rather than like see an abundance of possibilities, right? Like this will be as great as it can be. If it doesn't land with the client, then okay, we'll pivot and do something else. And like, it's almost like you're not trusting yourself to be able to like figure it out down the line. That's how I feel it manifesting in my life. If I get too locked into like one set of solutions rather than like, all right, we're going to go with the flow. Let's see how this plays out.
Or it's okay for me to, it's okay to be wrong, you know, it's fair. I mean, that's where the leadership comes in, because that rigid attitude really hampers your leadership. It really prevents you from taking risks, from innovating, from trying new things, you know? And so you've got, I mean, you know, what you're describing is what it's a thought trap. And there's a lot in the book about thought traps. Yep. And, you know, you're catastrophizing and you're saying this one thing will create a chain of events that has me ending up, you know, desolate and destitute. And that's a really, really punishing place to live. And so many of us live in that place, and it really can hold us back.
I have seen you do some exercises. You know, we did one last time we were in conversation. I think I just saw it on your Instagram. You did again, put your feet on the floor, or maybe it's not on Instagram. Maybe I just imagined it was, but put your feet on the floor, breathe, feel your, you talk about feeling your nostrils in the book, right? Like really feel your body. Are there other, like break the cycle of perfectionism, break that loop, the spiral that you're in, that we can do on this call?
Yeah, let's do it.
We do one. Is everybody down for that? Oh, I see clapping. Thank you, Molly. Awesome.
So everything in the book is based on research. I'm not a scientist, but you know, it's all evidence-based. And a lot of you know all the research on self-compassion, so I don't have to tell you all about that. Self-compassion is a proven discipline, practice. And I have a little self-compassion exercise when you're stuck in perfectionism. And so I want you to just, again, put your feet on the floor, just sit, just get comfortable. And man, my chest is very tight. I'm having a really anxious day and I'm breathing in my chest and I can feel it. So I'm going to try to send my breath further down into my belly. Try to make it a little less tight. And I want you to put a hand on your chest. And then think of something that you did well yesterday or today. It can be something really small that you sent your friend a text message, or that you made something yummy that you're excited to eat, or that you got in a workout that you feel good about, or that you answered some emails that had been lingering, anything that you feel good about. And I want you to just see that. And I want you to tell yourself, I did a good job. I did a good job on that. And I want you to stay with the good job. I don't want you to think ahead to the next thing you need to do, or, oh, but I still didn't do this, or I only worked out for 30 minutes. Just want you to stay with that feeling of doing a good job. I don't know how that feels for people.
We get some thumbs up. Thank you. That's nice. I like that. Our auras have changed. I feel like everybody's a little pinker right now. It's good. I want to talk about one more thing and then I want to take questions. And so, I mean, we have a nice kind of small enough intimate group that maybe folks can kind of raise their hands and ask some questions. I think we can do that. But the one thing I did want to talk about, we've talked a lot about sort of this, if you're the manager of people or if you're being managed by people, but I want to talk a little bit more about entrepreneurship because I see some folks here who, I mean, who have turned their achievements into massive businesses. And you were one of the early pioneers in creating women online. And so and I can think to myself, on one hand, you're freeing yourself from other people's anxieties and expectations from you if you break free of sort of this corporate traditional hierarchy. And on the other hand, you're trading a well-known lockstep traditional corporate hierarchy for like the Wild West. So how do you tap your anxiety in a different way when you're an entrepreneur?
Oh, and this, I'd love to hear people's thoughts on this. I mean, the funny thing about being an entrepreneur or an author is that you're never done, right? And so if you're anxious and you're an achiever, it's great because you're super driven and you're going to push yourself to that edge. And you also probably are going to use your anxiety to push yourself even further. Anxiety can actually really free up, ironically, creativity and focus and solutions, right? It is in moments of crisis that some of our best solutions happen and our worst. So anxiety is a great tool for an entrepreneur. And there's data to back this up. And people who become entrepreneurs, and this is controversial, but I sort of believe it. People who become entrepreneurs tend to have more mental illness. It is, and neurodiversity. And this is Michael Friedman at UCSF is the leading sort of voice in all of this. And I myself am super interested in entrepreneurs who are bipolar. I'm bipolar. I have bipolar 2, so I have hypomania. And there's some evidence, right, that drives forward. Trap is that you can burn out like crazy if you don't set limits. You can get stuck in anxiety and frozen. And so entrepreneurs in particular have to have a very, very strong and serious approach to their mental health because there's no one telling you what to do. There's no one telling you, go home. You have PTO. You have maternity leave. And so I think it's really, and actually I'm an advisor to a fabulous startup called Pioneer Mind. And they just launched the Founder Mental Health Pledge. And after SVB exploded, in particular, because there's a call now for venture capitalists to invest in the mental health of founders more seriously. And if you're like me, you never took any venture capital, it was all you. So, I just think it's really, really serious to take care of your mental health and to build in systems that help you protect yourself if you're an anxious person who is pursuing something on your own.
I also, one of the points you make in the book is that your anxiety, or just like you said, your anxiety is data. It's a signal that something is wrong. And I find that when I'm sort of when I'm feeling insecure, I'm like, okay, like as an entrepreneur, how do I, what support do I need? What are the tools I need? Who are the people I need? What is the walk away from the solution and come back to it later? But that to see it as a signal that you need to shore up, you know, whatever it is that you're anxious about.
And maybe not
that
act. I mean, I think that's the key. And for me, money is my huge source. So being an entrepreneur, you have to deal with money all the time. And so I would make bad decisions. And I have one of my favorite interviews is with a woman named Buffy Purcell, who's a personal finance coach and advisor and tax advisor. And, you know, her biggest piece of advice is when you're triggered and you're made anxious by something financial, do not act right away. Take the steps to get the information, get advice, make a plan. I think that's some of the best advice I've ever heard. And it's really important if you're someone who money makes you anxious and wants you to sort of take decisions.
I mean, that's so much the list, right? Like this is your board of advisors. These are the people you can turn to and say, hey, I need a gut check on this, or this is really like to have the people, to have your board of advisors, or to have a community, to build a community of people around you who can either validate your anxiety or say, here's another way to see it, right? I think that that's so important. Let's take some questions from our listers. I'm going to switch to a gallery view because I was just looking at more on her gorgeous pink blouse, but I'm going to switch to a gallery view so I can see like hands raising. I know there have to be questions. I'm just going to sit quietly until we have one. Classic journalist move over here. Right. Molly Beck, go for it.
This was awesome. I am just beyond excited to read your new book, Maura. For someone that read Hiding in the Bathroom and loved it, how is Anxious Achiever different, the same? How are you approaching it differently in the second one?
Hi, Molly. This book is really different. It's much more focused on leadership, and it's pretty firmly focused on mental health and anxiety. It's sort of, for me, I don't know if anyone else has felt this way. It's sort of an evolution in my thinking as well. And it's a little bit deeper, but I think still fun to read.
Love it. Cannot wait.
Thank you.
Rachel, did you have a question you wanted to ask, or were you just waving?
Oh, no, I had my hand up, but I was just waiting to see if anybody else wanted to go, because I get the opportunity to talk to Maura anytime. So, but I'll go. Maura, how do you suggest dealing with other people's anxiety about you? Like when you seem to be a trigger for them and it's keeping you from, you know, closing deals, getting where you want to go, any of that. Like this is not an uncommon thing for women as they rise to experience themselves as a trigger. And of course there's like, you know, like expectation, like, oh, how, like put a smiley face in your email, you know, soften things. But I'm just curious if that's something that I'm like turning on its head a little bit, but any thoughts on that?
It's a really tough one, right? Especially again, if you are not a white man. Although I'm sure white men trigger each other. Hello, why do they brag about money and drive big sports cars? And you know, I'm just going to tell you a quick story, because 2 days ago, when I went to the reception, the VIP reception for this thing in Iowa, because I wanted a drink and it was free. And I started talking to this woman and she's like, oh, why are you here? And I said, I'm a speaker. And she goes, you're in a breakout, right? And I said, no, I'm a keynoter. She goes, oh. And then after like 20 minutes later, she comes up to me and she goes, I'm so sorry. Why did I assume you were a breakout person? I don't even know what happened. And I realized that I totally she wants to be an author. I totally triggered her. And I was just really neutral because we can't change other people, even if they're biased and racist and patriarchal and jerks. It's not our job to fix them. And there was just a great study in HBR of what women board members, the emotional gymnastics they have learned to go through to be heard in board meetings so that men hear them and take their advice and don't just see them as the token woman. And these women go through the most insane impression management you could believe. They do couch advice. You know, I was thinking about this, and you've probably already thought, they do that because they have learned, and this is the best of the best. I talked about this with Marion Cooper. These are women who have made it to the boards of Fortune 500 companies. They still have to do all that shit. They can't change other people, and they want to be on the boards. And so sometimes it's really about like, you know what, this is what I want. This is what's important. I can't change that person. I'm going to do what I can. And I think that's why a lot of women leave. They leave systems.
Exhausting.
Oh.
I'm exhausted for all of those. I'm exhausted for all those conversations, just hearing about them.
You got to read this study. I'll try to find it. It just blew my mind.
One more question.
It's okay. You guys can have 10 minutes back. I've also learned not to take things personally.
Melissa Silverstein, I knew you had one.
Okay, so I was totally triggered all day Monday because I was going through this transition, and it like brought up just every anxiety that I have, success, blah 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 blah, all you know, crazy stuff. But I realized I was triggered, and like I said, you know what, I'm not getting anything else done. And I just never did that before. Like never, ever. So I always like plow through it. And you don't feel anything, you know? And I was just like, I don't know if I did a one-on-one, you know, like, oh, that was your anxiety but like just knowing I couldn't like think really clearly was something that, you know, I felt like a huge success, like, and so I guess my question is a little bit about tools. For, you know, like I hate going to events. I have to read your book about like hiding in the bathroom. I don't necessarily hide in the bathroom, I just leave. You know, I moved to the country, so I don't have to see anybody. You know, shit like that. But then you have to do stuff, right? So it's like when you're sitting in a place and you know, like you're dealing with it, right? Like, but you have to be successful. So like if you have any advice, tools, how to deal with those moments where you're just like, oh, it's gonna go either bad or it can be good.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, congratulations, because it sounds like you took care of yourself and gave yourself what you needed, because that was a huge day. And that's great. And sometimes we just need to give ourselves that break and not plow.
And acknowledge it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, you know, but I think in everyday matters, and I think of these women in the boardroom, you really do need to have a bag of tricks, and breathing is super helpful. And it's become a cliche for a reason. It's super, super helpful. I think having language that you can turn off the thought trap and have new language coming in. And I think this is really important if you have a toxic boss or if you're working with someone who triggers you, because I mean, I hear this all the time, like it's this boss that I have that is making me so anxious. how do I build armor for myself? And you really need to think of it that way. Like, before I meet with this person, I am going to be in my armor. I'm going to have given myself the pep talk and shown myself all the figures about why I'm great. Yep. And I'm going to breathe, and I'm going to bring to them something super clear, because anxiety loves a vacuum. And when there's a lack of communication, people get anxious. So I'm going to be super clear with them and tell them exactly what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to leave, and that's all I can do. So I think it really is about breathing and getting your body a little bit less anxious, and then having what they call cognitive reframing tools that help you power through. For social anxiety, I have terrible social anxiety. For me, it's, I have a plan for the party. I know what I'm going to look like. I know I have a little line, so I ask people a question, and then I'm going to leave. And when I have a game plan and I've rehearsed it, I can put on that armor, that character, and do better.
Thank you.
I love to leave a party early. It's my favorite thing to do.
Best thing to do.
Mhm.
Go home, take the shoes off, get in bed, like, best. Okay, so because this black box moment before your book launches is this great unknown, and because it can trigger so much anxiety, what can all of the folks on this call do to make sure that you feel supported, make sure you are supported, between now and the book launch next week?
Thank you for asking that question. I do feel super supportive by you. Here's the two biggest things you can do. You can pre-order the book. You can have a review ready for launch day. And I know I feel bad asking this, because reviews are a huge pain in the ass. And when people ask me, I'm always like, oh, but I sort of view it as like, you're gathering like goodwill chits in life. And so we all do it for each other. And so if you do it for me, I promise I will do it for you. Because that's really just having some reviews ready to go on launch day. If you've bought the book, like, that's what the Amazon people tell me is really important. So
Amazon reviews, right? Not Goodreads, Amazon. Okay.
no, I don't think Goodreads matters that much. I think it's Amazon reviews. And I know we all hate Amazon, but it's Amazon reviews are just, you have to create velocity in the algorithm. And so that helps. Yes.
Should we all tell someone to book you to speak
Yes. Please do.
and pay you to speak, or buy a ton of books?
Yes. Yes, please. May is Mental Health Month. And so I am happy to come and speak. I'm a very highly rated speaker. And this work is really important.
All right, done. We will do those things. Thank you, Maura, so much. I really, I believe in this book, and I believe that you are the right person to share this message. And I really think that you are going to have such a huge game-changing impact, because it is so much of a rethinking of how we think about success and power and influence. So I appreciate you and the time you took and your phone booth. I am wishing you a moment of peace every day between now and the time the book launches, and that feeling that you did good.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.